So welcome, Walter.
Thank you.
So I thought we'd start off with quite an easy question, or maybe not an easy question, but what is the rule of law and why is it so important for Australians?
The rule of law has a lot of aspects to it, but the core aspects are these. First, in a society that wants to live under what we call the rule of law, the laws should be certain. That is, they should be made, and they're made and they stand there. Nobody in authority has the right to create a new law or a new rule to apply just to your case or to this case. No, the laws have to be there ahead of time, and they're the laws that are applied. A corollary of that is that the laws should be public so that everybody can know what the laws are. In theory, that might be hard, but in practice, most people know what the laws are relating to the things that guide you in your life. So, certainty of laws. The second thing is that the laws should be general. That is, they should apply to everybody in the same way, and they should be directed to everybody generally. There are exceptions. You may have to make special rules for police. You may have to make special rules to govern immigrants who come here and are not yet citizens. But those are laws that are justified because the differences between people rationally call for different treatment. So the laws should apply equally to everybody, and any differences in the application of the laws and any special laws for categories have to be justified upon rational grounds. Thirdly, the laws have to be applied equally to everybody so that the same law as it's applied to you will be applied in the same way to me. If I'm a murderer on these facts, then you're also a murderer in these facts. If I have a lot of political power and a lot of money, it makes no difference. The law will still be applied in exactly the same way. So the law is applied to everybody in the same way to whom it applies. And then those three things are really the rule of law, but their existence then has ramifications. That is, it has consequences, because if you're going to have laws that apply equally to everybody, then you need to have somebody who applies them equally to everybody. So if there is an allegation that you've breached the law, somebody has to decide whether that law has been breached by you or not, and that person, in order to apply it equally, must have some characteristics. You can't have the police officer who arrested you applying the law and deciding your guilt, because that person has a point of view. So you need somebody who stands back, which means you need to have an impartial judge. That means you need to have an impartial judiciary. So that means then that if you have an impartial judiciary, there's another ramification of that, a logical consequence of that. For example, you cannot have the person who made the law be a judge who applies the law, because then the person who made the law has a view about why the law was a good law, and will have that in mind when applying the law to somebody who's said to have breached it. Instead, whatever the lawmaker thought about the wisdom of the law, the judge will have no preformed views about that, but will apply it impartially. It follows then that there's another ramification, or another logical consequence of the rule of law, and that is that you have a separation of lawmakers and law appliers. And a further one that I won't trouble you with, but there has to be somebody who executes the laws, who makes them work. If there's a law that says there can be schools in every district and the taxpayer will pay, somebody's got to do that. The lawmakers don't do it. Somebody has to do it. We call those people the government, the members of the government. They do it. Now, the law has to apply to them, so that although they're the government and they decide that there's going to be a school in this place or no school in this place, they have to do it according to the law also. So that just because somebody's a prime minister doesn't mean that the prime minister can say, I choose not to apply that law, I choose not to apply this one, and instead I'm going to do this for which there's no law. It follows then that lawmaking, law execution or actioning, and law application, judging, all have to be applied by three different separate sets of people, and we call that the separation of powers, so that the power to make law, the power to execute the laws, and the power to apply the laws, each acts of government, and each of those acts of government is performed by a different bunch of people in three different units who do not mix in their functions. In practice, there's a little bit of mixing that goes on, which is harmless, but in theory, they are separate and apart. So the rule of law connotes the things that I mentioned, involves the things I mentioned, certain laws that apply ahead of time, they apply to everybody, they're applied equally, and that gives rise to some logical consequences, like the separation of powers, and there are other things. So you can get into very complicated areas, but the heart of it is that.
Yeah, so you've just talked about the separation of powers, and you've been described as a fair and fearless judge.